Hello and welcome to StateViews, a new segment from the Daily Collegian in which we'll be giving members of the Penn State community a chance to express their opinions and viewpoints. My name is Mitchell Culler, and I'm honored to be joined today by State College Chief of Police, Thomas King. Mr. King, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate having you here.
Enjoy being invited to talk with you.
Definitely. So I guess let's get started right off the bat. What is the number one priority that you see for the State College Police Department right now?
Well, I've been in this community policing for 33 years and as chief for the past 22 years. And of course, I came to this community because of the attraction of having it being a college community in which there's a lot of vibrancy and actually a very safe community. Yeah. Certainly a lot of challenges for the community, but relatively a very, very safe community from a violent crime standpoint. So really our priorities really focus around more of the quality of life issues that really impact both the students and non-students that live together in the community. Things like public drunkenness, people urinating in public, vandalism, theft, those types of crimes that aren't the violent ones that are going to cause serious injury, but they're certainly the ones that really detract from the neighborhood and the community.
And that's that quality of life.
That quality of life where you want the place that you live, you work, you go to school, and you play to be of great quality, and so it detracts from the quality. And so certainly not the problems and challenges of a big urban city environment, but certainly things that we have to focus on and really deal with so that we try to keep the quality of life very high for our students and non-students alike.
Absolutely. How do you go about preparing for those specific kinds of things? Like what's, how is that different than, what kind of different challenges to that?
Well, first of all, policing a college community is very different, I believe, than policing a non-college community in the makeup of our community, the demographics of our community. And so for starts, you have to make sure that you are hiring the right people. So I think in terms of providing police service and being a service to all the citizens that we serve, we need to make sure that we're working hard on the front end to bring people who want to be part of policing a town that has a lot of students and it has non-students. It's going to have a lot of issues around alcohol. It's going to have issues around theft and vandalism, and people who are willing to be problem solvers. That's really what we do, is try to solve problems. When a citizen is having a problem, we are usually called to try to intervene and help out, whether it's because a crime has been committed or because they need help with some kind of challenge in their life. Okay. We deal with a lot of calls. More than half of our calls are service related, which they have nothing to do with crimes being committed. It's because people need help with something that they're facing, and we end up being that bridge between the problem they have and the solution. We make sure they get connected to the solution.
Okay. And I feel like that's definitely like a stated goal. That's very. But I feel like there's sometimes kind of a disconnect that happens where kind of public perception doesn't view it that way. So a lot of times, is there a reason that you can think of for that, or why?
Well, I think one of the challenges about the perception is that we are a very transient town. So the clear majority of our residents are going to be here for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
They're going to come from all types of communities across the country, actually throughout the world.
Right.
We have people coming to our community. And so they come to our community for a few years, sometimes as little as 2 years, sometimes 5 or 6 years, depending on their degrees. And so when they're here, their main focus is really what they're here for, is to get their education. So unless they have some reason to interact with the police, that's really not their high priority of figuring out what the police are all about.
Right.
And so I think the perceptions often come with maybe what their perception is, what they experienced from where they grew up, and maybe carried that forward to the community that they now are living in for a few years. Unlike communities that have very little turnover, where you might over 10 or 20 or 30 years get to know what your police department's all about. You might get to know who the officers are. You might get to build relationships through your children or through your churches or through your other organizations. Often with a transient town, you have the challenges of getting your mission out there and what you're all about to somebody that's going to be here for a very short time. And while they're here, they're really focused on the goal at hand.
Something else. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's probably our biggest challenge. And so we do as much as we can anytime we have an opportunity, like coming to talk to you today.
Right.
This is an opportunity to get our message out and what is the State College Police Department all about, what am I all about, to our student community. We work with student organizations. We work with many groups. Our community relations officer, Kelly Aston, spends a lot of time going out so that we can try to instill our mission, our image, what we're about to as many student groups as we can.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that sounds like it's definitely a busy time, especially if you have only 4 years to really make that play to get to know them, to have an aspect. Is there such a thing as a typical day in your life?
In my life, I come up through the ranks. I started here as a patrol officer. Of course, a typical day as a patrol officer is very different than a typical day as a chief.
I'm sure.
During my career, I was an officer, and then I was a detective. I worked undercover drug investigations. I did other criminal investigations. Then I got into supervision of patrol shifts, and then eventually in 1993 was appointed to my current position as chief of police. So since I became chief of police, my typical day, I'm on the administrative end. So I believe that a big part of the police department is working closely with the community and getting out. And so a lot of my day is meetings and meetings and meetings. So as I told you, I have another 4-hour meeting that starts at 10 o'clock today that will be on issues that relate to the police department and the community. So a typical day varies, but it's a lot of meetings. It's working with a lot of outside groups. And then, of course, a big part of my job internally is working at the policy level, developing policy, creating training, not doing the training, but deciding what training is most important for our officers, dealing with hiring situations, dealing with personnel issues, because occasionally when complaints come in, we're a firm believer that investigating and following up on all levels of complaints filed against police officers is very critical to make sure that you're always keeping a good check on the conduct and the behavior of officers. We have great officers in this community, but we do take all complaints against officers very seriously. So a big part of my job in our administration role is developing policy, making sure policy is being followed, and where we haven't hit the mark exactly the way we should have on a particular situation, that we provide additional training and make sure we get better at a situation that maybe we weren't so good at one time.
Okay. You mentioned that you were on a drug kind of finding or
undercover drug.
Undercover drug. Yeah. I was wondering how, in terms of enforcing that drug, sort of like, for students, obviously a main problem is alcohol, right, and marijuana usage. How is that kind of related? I guess, because in other parts of the country, for example, like marijuana is currently legal. Right. How do you feel about enforcing that here?
Well, from an enforcement of the law, what's really important for police is not to decide what laws are important and what laws aren't. Our role is to enforce the laws that the legislators adopt. Okay. And so our position is, if it's a law, it's our responsibility to enforce it. We can't interject our personal opinions. If I have a personal opinion about marijuana, whether it should or should not be legal, that shouldn't affect how I enforce the law. Or then it becomes too much up to the officer to decide what's important, when the state legislators are the ones who listen to their constituents and decide what the law should be. So, because, for example, Colorado and Washington might have now allowed marijuana for recreational use, it's not that in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That being said, as with any crimes, we look at triaging and what's the greatest crimes that are harming our community. Marijuana, for example, some would say is harmless. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know whether marijuana is harmless or not. I've seen bad things happen with marijuana being involved. I don't know if it's a causation. But now there's a great concern about it. I definitely have a great concern about synthetic marijuana. There's also across the country, and now we're facing in Center County, a very serious opiate use problem. The abuse of prescription drugs, opioid drugs, and people turning to heroin has become an epidemic in this country, and we're not immune from it here in Center County. So I did drug investigations in the 80s. And in the 80s, the drugs of choice that were causing the greatest danger in the community are different than they are now.
Right.
And so we have to adapt to what are the drugs that are causing us the greatest danger in this community.
Okay.
And things like cocaine, LSD, a lot of the synthetic products, and of course heroin and other opiates are a real serious concern for us.
Okay.
So that's what we try to focus on. But if we come across cases involving marijuana, it's not up to us to say we're going to ignore that. Or now we're making a decision about laws that should be done at the legislature.
Okay. Okay. Would you be willing to say on a personal level whether you think that it should be legal or illegal or?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I mean, and then that has no bearing, but my personal opinion is that for recreational purposes, it should not be legal.
Okay.
I don't support it for recreational purposes. From a medicinal purpose, if medical doctors say it's a value, I'm fully supportive of that. I don't know if it's a value, but if it could have some medical value, that doctors say this does have medical value, and it can relieve somebody of some symptoms that they're having that would improve their health condition, and the doctor says it's valuable, then I think that's fine. I think recreational purposes, it's not a good idea, and I think it's going to add to a great increase in driving under the influence cases, which means we know that the two ways people are likely to die in Center County, because we have a low violent crime rate.
Right.
If you're going to die by crime in Center County, most likely it's going to be either because of a domestic violence situation or a drunk driving, and that's either alcohol or drug. And we know from Colorado and Washington that there's already been a spike in the number of DUIs. I just don't think we need to add another product to have a society walking around that are just stoned and out of control. Even though people will use it responsibly, unfortunately, a large percentage won't use it responsibly, and that puts other people at risk when they drive around the community or go throughout the community. That's just a personal opinion.
Okay.
For a lot of reasons, I don't think it's a good idea for recreational purposes. Okay. But that's up to somebody that has a lot more knowledge than me to decide.
Right, absolutely. Okay. So one of the things, I guess, most topically, last week there was the NCAA announced that we're going to lift the sanctions. Penn State, we get to play, maybe, we hope, in a bowl game this year. And there was sort of a rally that broke out, and I was just wondering what is it like to be standing there watching that, knowing that you have to control that, you have to make sure that people have the right to gather and to organize, but also being charged with kind of keeping them safe while they do that.
It can be very challenging, and of course, being around here for over 3 decades, I've been part of and experienced many large crowds gathering for various purposes. Some very positive, like Monday night, and some not so, and more destructive and much more violent. And so, we as a police department have the responsibility to manage that, and so we're watching it closely to gauge, the size of the crowd and particularly the temperament of the crowd. Okay. And first of all, you usually know why the crowd's forming, because it's we knew it was because of the sanctions. So you start with the idea that this is a positive thing. This is not a negative thing. Okay. And so that more than likely people aren't going to want to be destructive. There's not us versus them. There's not something that people are upset about. So you start with watching the crowd. And while everybody has the right to peacefully assemble, and we'll always make sure people have that right, even a rally that takes to the streets and blocks roads without permits is not technically
Right.
legal.
Okay.
So that's not an inherent right without going through the permit process. But that being said, that's where you have to use a lot of judgment as a police department in making decisions. Okay, yeah, they shouldn't be blocking Beaver Avenue, but is that really that harmful under the totality of the circumstances? So we're watching the crowd. We're saying, okay, yeah, they're blocking the street, but how problematic is that for our community?
Okay.
So technically it might be a violation, but it's not creating a problem on Monday night with low traffic volume.
Absolutely.
People are not, destroying things. People are cheering, singing fight songs. We were happy just like everybody else. And so we're watching that, and the direction to the officers is that we will watch for people not getting out of hand. If someone starts to, for example, we had somebody that pulled a stop sign.
I heard about that.
Okay, we're going to take them aside and say, knock that off. You can't do that. I mean,
right.
You can be in the middle of the street. You can cheer. You can pass mattresses through the crowd, and you can do all those different things, and we can be loud and all that, but know where the line is. And as long as you do that, we're going to be fine with this. And so our response is really dictated by the actions and the behavior of the large crowd. Okay. If we have a very small few that are acting out, and we'll deal with those few, we're not going to ruin it for the whole group and say we're going to spray everybody and get all of you out of here. But once we develop a critical mass of, now it's not just one or two, it's now growing in size. And we know that as it starts to grow in size, if we don't begin to disperse it early enough, we're going to have major problems. We've actually waited too long.
Okay.
So there's a real fine line between when you don't need to move in and do anything from a large crowd standpoint. You just deal with a few individuals who are acting out inappropriately. And when you have to now say to the whole crowd, it's gotten to the point where it's out of hand, and now we have to give a dispersal order. And probably the biggest challenge over the years, or the misconception by people involved in big demonstrations or gatherings like this, is that when we have to give a dispersal order, because now we have too much damage, too many people at risk getting hurt and injured, and we give a dispersal order, the law allows us under those circumstances to give a dispersal order to leave. And when that order is given, everyone, I don't care if you're 20 years old or 80 years old, I don't care who you are, what you are, unless you're part of law enforcement that are part of policing the detail, we give the order to leave, you have to leave. Okay. And people are used to what the normal standard is that I can be out in public and you can't tell me to get off the street.
Okay.
Well, in that rare circumstance, the law says, yes, you have the right to do that. And then people end up getting in trouble for failure to disperse because they challenge the officers. So they think, I have a right to be in public. And so, fortunately, like Monday night, and like numerous other times, last year we won a very big football game against Michigan. Absolutely. 3 overtimes. It was so exciting. And we had a large crowd come down to Beaver Avenue again. It was a very happy crowd. I mean, they're high-fiving the officers. And we had no issues whatsoever. We had no issues Monday night to speak of, other than a couple, isolated ones.
Yeah.
A couple years ago with the killing of Bin Laden, we had people come out.
That, yeah.
Very happy crowd. They did their thing for a few hours, chanting USA, USA, and singing songs. And again, no issues whatsoever. Every once in a while, of course, the Paterno, after the firing of Paterno, that was very violent. That it was hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage, throwing rocks and bottles. Our response was very different.
Right.
And so our response is going to be dictated by the actions and behavior of the larger crowd.
Okay.
But it's challenging, and sometimes you have to have it just right, and it's not, you can't look in a crystal ball and know exactly when the moment is to say we need to disperse. And we want people, like Monday night, we want them to be able to have a good time. This was an exciting time for Penn State and for the community. Not just Penn State, for the whole State College community. This is big. And so we didn't want to be the stick in the mud that was going to ruin that if everything was working fine.
Okay. And then sort of, I guess, kind of make the little concessions, like put up traffic cones on the street.
Put fire police, block the road at Pew Street, diverted traffic, and it didn't create any significant inconvenience.
Yeah.
Under the circumstances. So you have to look at the totality of the circumstances, and then if we can deal with a couple isolated cases of someone going too far, we pull them aside, we deal with them, and then let everybody else do what they can. It's just when that becomes it's not just a few, it's now a larger percentage. Unfortunately, it ruins it for everyone. We don't know how that works in life.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I imagine it must be pretty nerve-wracking, because I was walking actually home from the Collegian that night, and I walked by the rally, and I just remember thinking, like, wow, if I saw the line of police officers, and I was like, wow, that must be absolutely terrifying I don't know about I don't know if it is, but I would to see all that and know that if something goes wrong, that's I would have to step in,
Yeah, I mean, it's, you're paying attention, you're on guard, but I think, we had a pretty good comfort level given the nature of the event. And, the group that was down there, thousands of people, and some came and left and others came in. They were very, as a whole, they were very respectful. They represented the university and themselves very well. I think they reacted appropriately given the news. It didn't do anything to tarnish reputation of the community or of Penn State. It was an exciting time.
Okay, absolutely.
And so it wasn't terrifying, but it is, the nerve-wracking part is you have a very small window between where everything's fine and you don't need to do anything to when you're really losing control and you've got to take action soon, or it's going to get way out of control. And if it gets way out of control, we go back to video footage because there's cameras in the area.
Right.
Now, a whole lot of people get in trouble and get arrested. It might not be right away. It might be later on. It just creates a lot of negativity, and we don't want people to get records. If we could disperse them without people getting into trouble, that saves everybody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And instead of it looking at it as we're doing something to harm them and to keep them from doing something they want to do, we're actually trying to keep people from getting themselves hurt or in trouble.
Right.
And we're not doing something against them. We're trying to do something for them.
Okay.
Though it's not viewed always that way when you're telling people you need to leave.
You can't. Yeah. When you're putting restrictions. Yeah, absolutely.
None of us like restrictions.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask about is sort of there's been kind of a trend, I guess, in dealing with sort of gatherings like that, and it's that there's been local police departments are kind of militarizing to an increasing degree, sort of bringing in higher caliber defense mechanisms and in some cases offensive mechanisms. Right. I just wanted to, how do you feel about that?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion this year on the what's been framed as the militarization of police, and of course it didn't just begin with the Ferguson, Missouri incident last month. There was a report issued in I think April by the ACLU, I believe it was, that looked at departments that were obtaining military equipment, surplus military equipment for the departments, and in some cases an opinion that some departments across the country were getting equipment that just, given the mission and what they would need to do as a police department, was just equipment that was just overboard.
Over the top.
And so, from my standpoint, we have obtained equipment over the years ago, actually, not recently, years ago, after the 1998 riots in on Beaver Avenue, which we had about 12 officers injured, over $100,000 worth of damage. We had absolutely no equipment. We didn't have helmets.
Sorry, just for our students who have only been here for a short period of time, could you just briefly explain kind of what happened back in the night?
In 1998, overnight hours during the Arts Festival. So it was a weekend of Arts Festival. During the overnight hours, there was a very large crowd in the Beaver Canyon area, and the crowd became hostile. Well, not hostile, but they formed. They took the street, and they began to create damage. They began to break down street lights, tear down light poles.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And broke some storefront windows, threw furniture off the balcony, and it was just a very, very bad situation.
Okay.
Up to that point, we had no equipment to deal with large, out of control crowds. We dealt with large crowds before, but not ones that we had to try to disperse. So trying to disperse them, we just were ineffective. We couldn't do it. We didn't have helmets. We didn't have canisters of pepper spray. We didn't have masks if we had to use any kind of gas, those kinds of things. And so we were ill prepared. We had to call in the state police. It took about 3 hours to resolve that conflict. And after about 3 to 4 hours, we had over $100,000 worth of damage. We eventually arrested about 40 people using videotape. And it was just an unfortunate time. And so the goal was that we would at least have equipment that if the crowd began to get out of control like that in the future, we could disperse them quickly so less people got in trouble, we'd have less damage, and we'd have less people hurt. And so at that time, we obtained some helmets from military surplus. They were used, they weren't the best, but we had no money in the budget.
It's something,
they were going to be thrown away, and so we got some helmets. And since then, we've replaced those helmets once or twice through regular borough budget. So it went through the borough budget, it was in the budget, it was approved by council, so it wasn't something that was obtained from, that we use now wasn't obtained from the military. It was obtained through the regular purchasing through the State College Borough purchasing system. So that was one of the things we got. The other thing that we've gotten in the past, and we don't have anymore, but we've since replaced through the borough budget, are patrol rifles. After 1999 or 98, 99, again, about the same time frame, was the beginning of things like Columbine. Columbine was a situation in Colorado everybody probably knows about, but when I first came into policing, if you had an active shooter in a building, you called your special operations team and you waited for them to form up, and after about an hour or two, you would plan on how you would enter that building. Well, if you have somebody in a school or in a mall or in any other place of large gathering, public facility, in there shooting people every 1 or 2 seconds.
Whatever the rate is.
Whatever the rate is, you should not. And that was the standard back in the late 90s, was that you have special teams to deal with that, and the patrol officers just sit and wait. And if the person came out, you dealt with it, but just wait. We can't do that anymore. I don't care whether you're state college, I don't care what department you are in the country. The response is, if you have a person that's actively shooting in a facility or in the public, we need the people who will be most first on the scene, which are your patrol officers, to be able to deal with that.
Just run in there.
You just have to go in and confront the gunman or the whoever, multiple or one, because every second could be another child or another adult's life. So to do that, our officers have to have a rifle. A handgun will not deal. These people don't go in these schools with handguns. So we wanted to equip our officers in the late 90s with rifles. So we obtained some old, still usable, but the military was no longer using some rifles. We obtained rifles to train patrol officers, as most departments across the country do. Since then, those rifles are no longer used. We now have purchased new ones with better weapons in terms of us. We're now well trained on it. But those were purchased through the State College Borough budget. So the two things we've gotten over the years is our helmets to protect our officers if they're hit with bottles or rocks, or if they're at the Beaver Canyon and something's dropped off the balcony. And patrol rifles in the event we would ever, we pray that we never would, but if we ever have an active shooter, the first cars on the scene can go in and confront the person. And we can't have our officers doing that without the proper equipment. So that's what we've obtained. And so, in my opinion, it's, I don't focus on, to me, militarization of police. What does that mean? What do you mean? Is that me getting helmets and providing our patrol officers with rifles that they could need to deal with an active shooter, making us military? I don't. If that is, then I support that, because that's equipment we need. I think that's just equipment that officers are expected to have, because if our loved ones are in that place where there's an active shooting, we want the officers to come and deal with that as quickly as possible. And I think everybody wants the officers to be able to do that as safely as possible. And so I think it's a matter of, one, are you getting equipment that is way over the top, that you have absolutely no reason to suspect you would ever need?
Right.
And the rare times you would need it, you could call for an outside resource to assist you. The second part of that is you might have the equipment, and it's less about what you have, but more about how you use it.
Right. Okay.
You know, it's not that the equipment's bad, it's how you use the equipment. And so I think it's important to have training on it. It's important to have policy on it. It's important, for example, Monday night. Yeah, you know, we had a helmet on in case somebody threw something or something was accidentally dropped off of a balcony because the officers are standing under there.
Right.
But their face shields are up, so I can see you face to face. I'm not hidden behind a mask. I have my face shield up, and we can have communications. And the only thing I'm doing is protecting my head in case somebody throws something or drops something. And so, you know, we always do that in that particular area, especially because of the high rises. And we have had no issues with that on Monday night. No one was concerned about that. I think it's almost like, well, of course.
Right. Okay.
You know, you're the one called on to have to deal with this if it gets out of hand. And so I'm really a proponent of there are some items that we would never obtain that other agencies maybe have. But there is plenty of equipment that could come from the military that is very valuable to agencies that can't afford it. And it's valuable because it's going to help quell major problems in a community, and in cases of rifles, it's going to allow officers to go into a facility where there might be an active shooter and stop the killings. That we're the ones responsible for doing that. So it's more about how you use it and not what you have.
Okay. Okay. And then I guess kind of along with that is another program that was recently, or I guess currently being piloted in New York, is the kind of having wearable cameras for police officers. Do you think that that would be help or a hindrance to kind of to doing your job, to enforcing the laws, and then, but at the same time also, you know, keeping public safety?
Yeah. Generally speaking, I mean, I'm very interested in that program, and we could eventually, over the next year or two, explore or pilot that program. I'm watching it closely. I don't think it's not a hindrance at all to have something that is visual, that a third party, a court, whether it's criminally or civilly, or even my administrators from a training standpoint, if I can see every interaction an officer's having, it might not have been a major situation, but I could give them some training on, here's a better way to approach this situation. You didn't do anything, you know, blatantly wrong, but how about thinking of this and that? So anytime you have something like that, you can go back and look at footage. You can critique it, and the majority of the times it would be used for training purposes, not to prove a crime or to prove whether somebody violated someone's rights or something like that. But anytime you have that kind of video evidence, this day and age, everyone wants to see evidence.
Right.
You know, just this week, you know, everything over the news about Ray Rice. You know, what ended up being the thing that made a big difference in that case is the video footage of seeing what happened in the elevator. Everybody nowadays wants to see the video. So if we have officers wearing body cameras and all these interactions are recorded, then it's not just the officer's word against the person they're interacting with, their word. You could go to video evidence, and you could, as a department or as a third party, you could look at that and decide whether or not it was appropriate. And we can train for that. So I'm supportive, but there are some challenges with that. A lot of people, you know, for example, we can record, we can capture anything out in the public. But once we go into someone's home, where you have a lot more greater expectation of privacy in your home, now, based on the laws, we have an issue with that body recorder recording in someone's private home.
Right. Okay.
And so, if we're going to eventually go to body cameras worn by officers, we're going to have officers who are recording something in public and are going to have to know, maybe rushing into a call on, say, a domestic violence, and have to remember, oh, I'm about ready to cross the threshold of this door. I need to remember to
when we switch,
shut the camera off.
Okay.
Now we're going to have maybe some kind of physical altercation because you're dealing with someone that's resisting arrest because they've committed a crime on domestic violence, and people are going to say, well, where's the tape? Well, I shut it off. Oh, well, why'd you shut it off?
Right.
Well, because
Left.
we've got to get the laws to be
Okay.
supportive of body cameras.
Okay.
So my biggest concern right now is that we could have some challenges around the issue of what do the laws allow for police reporting in private areas.
Okay.
And so I think, as with anything, sometimes the laws don't keep up with the technology.
Okay.
But generally speaking, I think it's an interesting program. I'm interested in considering it. And I think anytime someone has a concern about something an officer did, that we could go back to the footage and we could sit down together and review it.
Okay.
The other side of that is it also means that each time someone's committing a crime, the officer's just capturing it. So we're going to be able to hold you accountable with greater evidence because
Right.
we've captured. So it goes both ways.
Right.
It could be evidence against the person committing a crime. It could be evidence against a police officer who may have committed a crime.
Okay. And then just really, really quickly, I just wanted to ask, speaking of kind of that gray area between, people and police, do you have any words of advice or any views on the events that happened in Ferguson, Missouri recently?
Well, I think, first of all I know about Ferguson, the incident, is everything that you and I and others are reading and hearing on the news.
Okay.
I've read some of the things and I've watched some of the news stories, but haven't read everything that exists. I'm very interested in being able to see the reports of the investigations from the various entities who are doing the investigations, the Department of Justice, the FBI, looking at those independent investigations and finding out what they determine. I think that will be very informative to allow me to decide, what occurred out there. And anytime something like that happens across the country that has some national attention, I think all law enforcement agencies should pay very close attention to it and decide, is there anything happening there that we need to figure out here? Is there anything we can do to make sure we aren't in that situation? But I think the first thing is to have those conducting the investigation, particularly the Department of Justice and the FBI, who I think will go in there, and I'm confident will conduct an independent investigation that will have a lot of facts. Let's find out what they learned, and is there anything we can replicate here to try to figure out how we can make sure we don't get in that situation. If there is, depending on what they find, we want to make sure that we learn from what other people have gone through. We don't need to wait and have ourselves go through it to learn from things happening across the country. So I think it's always important for everybody to, whatever your reason for looking at a situation is, to get facts from sources, put all the facts together, and then base your decision on facts. Certainly have no reason to doubt that a lot of what we're hearing about out in Ferguson, Missouri is exactly what happened. But I think that we're hearing bits and pieces, and I like to see the whole puzzle together. It gives us the clearest picture to know how to move forward.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Once again, I just wanted to give you a massive thank you for spending your time here today. And also, thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to see more views, be sure to check out the opinions page at the Daily Collegian, visit our website, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much.